There is a moment in every person's life that feels like a quiet collapse. For some, it happens late at night, when the world finally becomes silent enough for the truth to speak. For others, it happens in a crowded room, a smile holding back a storm that no one else can see. Let me tell you a story. A young woman sits in her car after a long day. Another disappointment, another burden stacked on top of the last. She turns off the engine, places her hands on the steering wheel, and stops. She has held herself together for so long that she no longer remembers what it means not to. One breath, then another. And suddenly, something in her breaks silently inside. Tears she did not plan, shaking she cannot control. Memories she didn't know were still alive. It all erupts at once. But here is the strange part. When it ends, she does not feel weaker. She feels lighter, calmer, clearer, almost as if a window inside her mind has been opened after years of dust and darkness. That moment, the emotional flood followed by an unexpected clarity, is something humans have experienced for thousands of years. And it has a name. Have you ever wondered why a moment like this, a breakdown, a sudden cry, an unexpected release, can make us feel more human, more present, more alive? Why do we feel better after we fall apart? This is what ancient philosophers called catharsis, the cleansing, the emotional purifying, the powerful reset that happens when emotion finally finds its way out. We spend most of our lives trying not to feel too deeply. We suppress, we endure, we stay strong. But something remarkable happens the moment we stop fighting ourselves. In this video, we are going to explore why emotional release matters more than ever, from Aristotle's early ideas to modern psychology and neuroscience, from tragic theater in ancient Greece to the silent breakdowns that shape our lives today. Let's begin. Long before psychology existed, long before neuroscience scanned the storms inside the human mind, there was a philosopher watching people cry in the dark. His name was Aristotle. In ancient Greece, tragedy was not entertainment. It was a societal ritual, a place where thousands gathered in open-air theaters to confront the emotions they tried to hide in everyday life. Imagine it. A summer night in Athens. The audience sits beneath the stars, breathing in the dust of the arena, waiting for a story of suffering, betrayal, loss. Stories far heavier than their own. The actors step forward, masks illuminated by torchlight, voices echoing into the hills. And as the story unfolds, something incredible happens. A collective wave of emotion moves through the crowd. People cry, people tremble, people feel fear, pity, grief, and then, unexpectedly, relief. Aristotle observed this and proposed something revolutionary. Tragedy cleanses the soul. It purifies us through the emotions it awakens. It gives shape to feelings we cannot express in our own lives. He called this powerful emotional shift catharsis. To Aristotle, we do not watch tragic stories because humans enjoy suffering. We watch them because they help us face our own suffering, safely, symbolically, and together. Tragedy becomes a mirror, a way to see our buried fears, our unspoken grief, our hidden vulnerabilities reflected back at us. And through that reflection, something inside us unclenches. The audience leaves not devastated, but transformed. Aristotle believed that this emotional release was not a mistake of art, it was the purpose of art. And in many ways, this ancient insight still lives inside every film, every novel, every song that makes your chest tighten and your eyes burn. Which brings us to the modern age, a time when science stepped in to understand what Aristotle could only observe. As centuries passed, the world changed, but the human heart did not. Emotions still spilled out of us in unexpected ways. People still broke down in the dark, still felt lighter afterward, still carried invisible storms inside them. But it was not until the late 19th century that someone finally asked the question, what if talking, simply talking, could heal the mind? This question led to one of the most important encounters in the history of psychology: Joseph Breuer and a young neurologist named Sigmund Freud. Together they observed something remarkable. A woman known in the literature as Anna O suffered from paralysis, hallucinations, and intense emotional distress. But when Breuer encouraged her to speak freely, to let her thoughts, memories, and buried pain pour out, something miraculous happened. Her symptoms eased. Her mind cleared. She described the process herself as a talking cure. Another phrase she used was even more poetic: chimney sweeping, the cleaning out of the emotional soot that had built up over years. Freud and Breuer realized that unexpressed emotion does not disappear. It hides, it compresses, it waits, and when released, it reshapes the entire inner world. Freud called this process abreaction, an explosive emotional discharge that frees the psyche from the weight of repressed feelings. He wrote, "Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth in uglier ways." Sigmund Freud. In other words, what you refuse to feel will eventually force itself to be felt. Freud believed catharsis was not just a moment, it was a mechanism, a natural healing reflex of the human mind. When trauma is locked inside us, the psyche becomes a pressure chamber. Thoughts twist, emotions harden, the body tightens. But in the moment of release, whether through tears, through confession, through memory, the pressure drops, and suddenly the mind can breathe again. It was Freud who famously declared, "Being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise." Because honesty is the doorway to catharsis, and catharsis is the doorway to clarity. In a way, Freud was arriving at the same truth Aristotle had seen thousands of years earlier. Emotional release transforms us. But now, for the first time, there was a scientific framework to explain why. And that question, what is happening inside the mind during catharsis, would soon lead to another frontier altogether: the study of the brain itself. For thousands of years, philosophers and poets tried to describe catharsis with metaphors: storms, rivers, cleansing fires, sacred purifications. But today, for the first time in human history, we can actually watch the brain experience catharsis. And what we discover is astonishing. When emotions are suppressed, when we hold it together, stay strong, or push things down, the brain enters a state of heightened stress. The amygdala, the center of emotional alarm, fires like a flashing siren. Stress hormones rise. The body prepares for danger that never arrives. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient wisdom always knew: the body keeps the score. Bessel van der Kolk. Unfelt emotion becomes stored tension, not just in the mind, but in the muscles, breath, heartbeat, sleep, and memory. Then comes the moment of catharsis: a tear, a confession, a breath that trembles on its way out. And inside the brain, something extraordinary happens. The amygdala calms. The prefrontal cortex, your center of clarity, re-engages. Oxytocin and endorphins begin to rise. The parasympathetic nervous system whispers, "It's safe now." Neuroscientists sometimes call this a neural reset, a moment when the brain reorganizes emotional memory instead of endlessly looping it. It is the biological explanation behind what Aristotle sensed and what Freud observed. When we release emotion consciously, the brain literally rewires. Why crying helps? Crying is not a sign of weakness. It is a built-in regulatory system. Tears contain stress hormones. Letting them flow is the body's way of flushing out emotional overload. That is why, after a deep cry, people often say, "I don't know why, but I feel better." The truth is simple. Your brain just shifted from survival to healing. Here's something even more fascinating. When you watch a powerful scene in a film or listen to a song that moves you, your brain reacts as if the emotion is your own. Mirror neurons fire. Heart rhythms sync with the narrative. The body enters a state of emotional simulation. This is why art heals. It gives you a safe, symbolic space to feel what you've avoided, a place where emotion becomes meaning. As neuroscientist Antonio Damasio said, "We are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think." Catharsis reminds us of this every time it arrives. And these biological truths lead us into another realm, one humans have always understood intuitively: the power of art, cinema, and music as emotional release. Art has always known something that science only recently proved: that humans sometimes need to feel things indirectly to heal directly. When a film scene breaks your heart, when a voice in a song sounds like it's speaking your pain aloud, when a painting forces you to confront something you've buried, that is catharsis working through symbols instead of speech. Think about the last time a movie made you unexpectedly emotional. You were not the one losing a lover, facing a tragedy, or standing in the rain as the world fell apart. But somehow, your chest tightened, your throat closed, your eyes burned. Your body responded as if the story was your own. This is the power of narrative. Stories allow us to experience emotions we avoid, in a world where it is safe to feel them. Inside the cinema, in the dim glow of the screen, we surrender to the emotions we resist in our daily lives. And there is a quiet honesty in that, an honesty we rarely give ourselves. That is why tragedy has survived for thousands of years, why people cried in Athenian amphitheaters, why they cry in modern theaters today. As Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." But when that pain is experienced through art, it becomes bearable, it becomes meaningful, it becomes shared. Music works the same way. A single note, a trembling voice, a melody rising from the depths of someone else's sorrow can unlock something inside you that you did not know was locked. Music bypasses your defenses. It goes straight to the emotional core, to the place where language ends and feeling begins. Sometimes you do not cry for the song itself. You cry for the things the song awakens. And when the emotion finally spills out, in the quiet of your room, or on a late-night walk, or while staring at the ceiling in the dark, you feel the unmistakable softness that follows catharsis. A sense of release. A sense of coming back to yourself. A sense of clarity that arrives only after the storm. Art does not heal you by accident. It heals you because it reminds you that you are human, and humans are not meant to carry everything silently. Some emotions demand expression. Some stories demand to be lived through, even if only for 2 hours in a cinema seat or 3 minutes inside a song. And in those moments when a piece of art moves you so deeply that you forget the world for a while, you are experiencing one of the oldest, most universal forms of healing known to humanity. Catharsis is not a weakness. It is a return. A return to the emotional truth we spend our lives trying to outrun. Most people imagine catharsis as something dramatic, a breakdown, a crisis, a moment where everything spills over. But the truth is far simpler and far more human. Catharsis is woven into the quiet moments of our daily lives, the moments where we finally stop pretending we are okay. We live in a culture that rewards composure. We are told to stay calm, stay professional, stay in control, even when our inner world is aching for expression. So we hold our breath. We swallow our anger. We distract ourselves from grief. We smile through disappointment. And little by little, something inside us tightens. Suppressed emotion does not disappear. It stores itself in our bodies, in the shoulders that refuse to drop, in the stomach that won't relax, in the insomnia that won't fade. We become, without realizing it, a collection of unspoken stories. That is why the smallest release can feel so enormous. A late-night conversation with someone who listens without judgment. A quiet drive where a song finally breaks through your armor. A moment in the shower where tears come without warning. A confession whispered in the dark. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs that the mind is trying to keep itself whole. Sometimes catharsis arrives not as tears, but as laughter after days of tension. Sometimes it comes as shaking, as silence, as sudden honesty, the kind that feels both terrifying and liberating. Modern psychology tells us that expression is regulation. The nervous system resets itself through emotional release. But even without the science, we feel this truth. We feel it in how the air seems easier to breathe afterward, how colors appear a little more vivid, how our thoughts line up instead of crashing into one another. As if the world has not changed, but our relationship to it has. Catharsis gives us back the space we lose when we try to be too strong. It allows the heart to soften, the mind to reorganize, the body to rest. It lets us be human, something we forget in the rush to survive, succeed, and appear unshakable. And maybe that is the quiet paradox of emotional release. We spend so much time trying not to fall apart, only to discover that falling apart, gently and honestly, is often how we come back together again. We like to believe we are rational creatures, guided by thought, discipline, and logic. But most of us are far more afraid of our own emotions than we are of any external threat. It is not danger that terrifies us. It is the fear of finally feeling what we've avoided for years. From childhood, many of us learn that certain emotions are unacceptable. Don't cry. Be strong. Get over it. We internalize these messages so deeply that by adulthood, our emotional world becomes a place we tiptoe around, as if one wrong step could cause everything to crumble. So we build strategies: distraction, overworking, numbing, irony, pretending. We become experts at self-avoidance, not because we don't feel, but because we feel too much, and we fear that if we ever open the door even slightly, the whole room will flood. The irony is that the emotions we repress are never as overwhelming as the repression itself. It is the holding, not the feeling, that exhausts us. As Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." This is the hidden cost of emotional avoidance. The more we push things away, the more power they gain in the dark. A small grief becomes a shadow that follows us everywhere. A single disappointment becomes the lens through which we see ourselves. Unfelt anger becomes chronic tension. Unspoken sadness becomes isolation disguised as independence. We fear emotions because we fear losing control. But control is a fragile illusion. People do not break because they feel too deeply. They break because they have been silent for too long. Catharsis threatens that silence. It asks us to stop performing strength and start practicing truth. It asks us to let the armor fall, not because we are weak, but because armor is heavy, and we were never meant to wear it forever. In the modern world, emotional vulnerability is treated like a flaw, something to hide, something to fix. But vulnerability is not what destroys us. It is what frees us. It is the moment the body stops bracing for impact and starts telling the truth. The fear of catharsis is really the fear of meeting ourselves without filters. To look in the mirror and see not the curated version, but the raw, aching, honest one beneath it. Yet every time someone finally lets go, in a confession, a cry, a moment of clarity, there is always the same quiet realization afterward. That wasn't as terrifying as I thought. Because the moment you face what you've been afraid to feel, you discover that the emotion wasn't a monster. It was simply a message. And once heard, it no longer needs to shout. The moments after catharsis are unlike anything else. There is a stillness, a strange quiet, as if the mind has finally exhaled after holding its breath for years. People often describe it as lightness, but it is more than that. It is a return to the self, a homecoming from an internal war no one else knew you were fighting. At first, the body responds before the mind does. Your shoulders drop. Your heartbeat slows. Your breath finds a rhythm that feels older than language. It is the nervous system recognizing safety, the body whispering, "You survived. You're here." Then comes the mental clarity, subtle but unmistakable. Thoughts that once spun in circles begin to align. Decisions that felt impossible suddenly seem simple. Emotions that once felt like tidal waves become shapes you can finally understand. It is not that life becomes easy. It is that your inner world is no longer a battlefield. Catharsis does not solve everything. It does not erase the past or rewrite the story or magically undo the things that hurt us. But it does something just as important. It makes space. Space for understanding. Space for acceptance. Space for new choices, new interpretations, new ways of being. Where emotion once crowded every corner, there is room now to breathe, to think, to see clearly. This space is where healing quietly begins. Because healing is not a sudden transformation, it is a gradual reorganization of the self. The pieces rearrange, the story shifts, the weight redistributes until it no longer breaks you to carry it. What catharsis leaves behind is a softer version of strength, not the rigid, stoic kind that demands silence, but the living strength that breathes, bends, feels, and continues. A strength that does not fear emotion, because it has learned that emotion is not the enemy. Sometimes the aftermath is calm. Sometimes it is reflective. Sometimes it is tender, like something inside you has been reset. But almost always there is a sense of honesty, a feeling that you are finally aligned with what is true inside you. And that truth, once accessed, cannot be unlearned. This is why people describe catharsis as cleansing. Not because it washes away the past, but because it reveals what was always beneath the clutter. You, without the weight of unspoken emotion. And in that newfound clarity, the world does not change, but you do. You see differently, feel differently, breathe differently. You step back into your life with a mind that is unburdened and a heart that can finally move again. According to Aristotle, a powerful tragedy reveals the layers of emotion we already carry inside us, but often suppress. The feelings we try to control, the grief we cover, the anger we deny. When the hero on stage falls, faces betrayal, or confronts injustice, we tremble silently with them. Because the disaster on the stage is not just a story, it reflects the complexity of life itself, touching truths that resonate within all of us. As Aristotle said, tragedy is a way of learning from pain. This principle extends beyond the theater. Life constantly presents moments that stir the emotions we hide: disappointments, loss, conflict, and unspoken longings. Catharsis, then, is not just an occasional eruption of tears or anger. It is a lifelong practice. It is the conscious willingness to feel, to release, and to integrate what we otherwise might carry in silence. We carry so many stories with us: old regrets, unfinished conversations, fears we never confronted. And holding them tightly only increases their weight. Catharsis asks us to open our hands, to let the emotions move through us rather than stagnate inside. It is in this space, between feeling and release, that understanding and healing quietly emerge. When we allow ourselves these moments, whether through art, conversation, reflection, or simple acknowledgement of our inner life, something transforms. Strength is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the courage to meet our feelings honestly. Pain becomes insight. Tension becomes clarity. Suppressed chaos becomes a place for growth. In the end, catharsis teaches us that letting go is not forgetting, nor is it weakness. It is the conscious act of reclaiming ourselves from the weight of what we have held onto for too long. It is a reminder that emotion, when acknowledged and expressed, is not a threat. It is a guide, a teacher, a path toward a freer, lighter, and more authentic life. And so, the practice of catharsis continues, not in a single moment of drama, but in the everyday courage to feel, to release, and to return to oneself again and again. And so, catharsis is not just a concept from ancient philosophy, nor a tool for therapy. It is a practice of living. Every tear, every honest confession, every moment we allow ourselves to feel fully, brings us closer to clarity, strength, and a truer version of ourselves. Remember, emotion is not the enemy. It is a guide, a teacher, a path. Let yourself experience it, release it, and return to the world a little lighter each time. So next time you feel the urge to cry, to vent, to write, or simply to pause and face your feelings, do it. That moment of honesty might be the most powerful act of courage you ever take. Because in the end, catharsis is not about breaking. It is about becoming whole.